We can't get past drawing lines and boundaries. It's got to be Democrat, it's got to be Republicans, it's got to be the Tea Party versus these guys, instead of saying, hey, our country's in trouble and these are the areas that's in trouble. How do we rectify this situation?
Exactly. And I think to expand that out to a societal context, that's something, obviously it happened after this record came out, but I was and still am so incensed by what took place in Arizona with Gabby Giffords. And I can trace those roots back 20, 30 plus years in this country. For instance, Columbine happened, and that was a tragedy that shook this nation. And the response from a lot of people was to say that heavy metal music was responsible for this. And then that was pretty much, laughed out of court, so to speak. It was shot down pretty quickly. But that's where the discussion really ended. We never, as a country and as a society, took it one step further and said, okay, well, you know what, Marilyn Manson wasn't responsible for this. Let's not kid ourselves. We're all rational thinking adults here. Really, at the end of the day, these kids weren't vandalizing the school, and they didn't seem to be severely mentally disturbed, but a lot of times, those things don't manifest until it's too late. All it took for Dylan and Eric at Columbine, they just needed somebody to talk to. If they had one person to talk to, we probably could have avoided this entire thing. We never elevated the conversation in this country to that level, and then we certainly didn't take it the one step further and say, okay, how do we get people like this somebody to talk to so we can avoid things like this? We never took it that far, and several years later we had Virginia Tech and the body counts rising, and then we had a guy who was severely mentally disturbed walk up to a congresswoman and put a gun to her face and pull the trigger in front of a group of people and shoot a 5-year-old girl and a federal judge and things like that, because it was a lot easier to just throw stones from glass houses than it was to say, hey, maybe it's worth making some sacrifices as a culture and as a society to give people like this somebody to talk to. And, it's easy to talk about the Columbines and the Gabby Giffords and stuff like that, but what about the people the thousands of people for every Jared Loughner who aren't shooting a congresswoman, but who are damaging themselves and leading a really broken life because we as a society don't know how to treat them and how to approach them, or we're just unwilling to try.
And that's where sort of the flip side of the architects of guilt, sort of the arbiters of blame. And that's all we want to do in this country is tag somebody to blame for whatever the problem is, and then
so we can wash our hands of it. Exactly. And something that was really important in the lyrics of this record for me was I didn't want to leave myself out of, the names that I was scrawling on the wall. And I think that I can, at my worst, be just as guilty as everybody else. And I need to hold myself to a higher standard, and starting with this record, and then when I went back and looked at that body of work, I was disgusted with myself in the best way possible. If that makes any sense, I was like, I don't want to be a part of these kinds of things, and I want to think about somebody other than myself, because now that I've put pen to paper and now that I see this, I really have a pretty solid understanding of the damage that complacency can do in my life and in others.
Well, that sort of leads to the first song on the album, The New Hell. I was going to ask you, for you, what is your new hell?
That song to me is a very Southern song. I talk about the Bible Belt and I talk about James Byrd and things like that. But for me, the new hell, is a place where James Byrd can be dragged behind a truck for several miles of country road, and there are pieces of him across 75 places, and he was alive for half of it until his head popped off when he hit a ditch. That's worse than anything I ever read about in the Bible or that I was ever told about in Sunday school, and we did that. Humans did that, and Texas did that. Not to say that Southern culture embodies that incident, but that's a part of our history. That happened in 1998. Here it is in 2011, and most people who hear that song are going to have no idea who James Byrd Jr. was. Why is that? We're not talking about it. As soon as we stop talking about things like that, we're giving them an ugly place where they can hide and fester until they rear up their head again.
And it's disturbing, all over disturbing. And again, it just comes back to what's going on in this country, where we're all so obliviously off in our own little worlds, screaming about whatever injustices and pointing fingers, that nobody is coming together and attempting to address the issues and work together.
Absolutely, and a part of it, I think, is just the ethnocentric nature of humanity, and especially, Western civilization. I think there's a good measure of xenophobia and homophobia and racism and sexism and anti-Semitism and things like that are all mixed in, either overtly or, bubbling underneath the surface. Some of it is willful ignorance, and some of it is just pure evil. I think that leads up to it. But, it's definitely, I'm trying to think of the word that you used when you said, the first time that you listened to it. I don't want it to be overwhelming, but I do want it to almost be suffocating, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, I felt pummeled. And
pummeling.
It was like a shock to the system.
Yeah, and I think that the guys did a great job of embodying that with the music, because it's fast, technical, and it's very hard hitting. And I wanted there to be a message in what I was doing to match that pummeling intensity, and for you to just feel beaten down kind of by the theme. And at that point, you have no choice but to take it upon yourself to build yourself back up.
Well, and even when you look at the album art's disturbing to look at, but it's like the train wreck thing. You can't look away. What's the story behind the artwork for the album?
Well, I'm glad that you asked, and that's something that I wanted to tie into the title and the theme of the songs. And for me, I'm talking about in the record, things like the Waco Siege and the Jonestown Massacre and the FBI's overreach at Ruby Ridge and the dragging death of James Byrd and, tangentially issues like the West Memphis 3 and things like that that are tough to talk about. And they're things that happen in our recent history that we'd really rather not discuss. But they happened, and they're crystal clear, and the information's out there for us to find and for us to inform ourselves so we can avoid that portion of history repeating itself. But I wanted the album artwork to be something that was uncomfortable, because it's uncomfortable to talk about, what happened at Jonestown and what happened in Waco. And again, that's another Texas thing. So this artwork is I don't think it's going to make like any old lady's vomit or anything like that, but it's one of those things that you look at and you go, this makes me uneasy, and I'm not exactly sure why, which is really what I wanted, because it would have been really, we could do like pentagrams and goat heads and blood and guts and gore, and people will understand, okay, well, that's a severed head. I'm supposed to be grossed out. I'm supposed to be upset by that, It's an entirely different thing to put something out there that's not in itself patently offensive, but that's still an upsetting thing to behold. And so, and that's the discussion I had with Ryan Clark, who did the artwork for this record. And I told him I wanted it to look almost like an art installation piece. And there's a reason that the background is white. It's pristine and it's very clear. And I think that makes the image all that much more powerful, because it's right there. It's crystal clear, and there's no getting away from just this kind of weird, contorted figure that makes us really uncomfortable. And it's bold, and it's up front, and it's front and center, which is hopefully the same as, the music and the message. But a lot of people have seen that the guy's wearing a hat commonly associated with the Catholic Church, and he's vomiting out black stuff. And so a lot of people have been really fast to say, okay, well, this is an anti-Catholic record, because it makes them feel better. And let's not kid ourselves for a second. Like, what if people in North Ireland been getting killed over for the last how many years, Catholicism and the Protestant Church. And the only reason that the Protestant Church ever came about was because Henry VIII wanted to be able to get laid. So it's arose by any other name, but there's this deep-seated and long-fostered engendered hatred between, the Protestant Church, and especially kind of the extreme revivalist movement that's really endemic of Southern America. Those guys have a lot of hatred for the Catholic Church. And listen, I mean, I'm certainly no fan of the Catholic Church. I think that they're warlords and profiteers, but I think that so are the dangerous portions of Islam, and so are the dangerous portions of, the proselytizers of the Christian faith. So people have already started to contort, and people are using the lyrics on this record to support their agnosticism and to support their Christianity and to support their conservatism and to support their liberalism. So I think, once we create it and put it out there, it's up to everybody to look at the content and to kind of come to their own conclusions. And you know what, if you can find the justification in it and it bolsters what your beliefs are, I can get behind that as long as it's a positive force in your life and for other people.